And hello, everybody. I am Jim Freund, and this is a pre-recording or video recording, whichever you prefer, of Hour of the Wolf. This will probably run a little longer than the version than that which will be eventually on the radio, but I will edit that down, and hopefully any curse words that I've forgotten to get rid of or anything like that, we'll simply try to avoid them. But we're doing one out of like three intertwined topics with us. I will describe after I introduce my co-host slash guest at the same time is Dan Persons, who does the reviews for the show. There he is now.
Thighs. Oh, I'm sorry. You can't say that kind of word on the radio,
Right.
can you?
And after that, we will discuss what the topic is. But if you look at the two posters on top, which are actually going to, at this point, they're going to take their leave so that we can, use up most of the screen, which is, after all, what we want to do, especially on radio. And so Dan does movie reviews for Hour of the Wolf, and he has had a history of doing this for 15 years, 50 years.
Not quite 50. My background isn't quite as extensive as yours. I think it
When was
runs
Cine
something.
Fantastique?
Yeah, Cine Fantastique. I was a journalist and critic and eventually editor for Cine Fantastique.
And how many years ago did you start there?
That was something like 35 years ago.
Oh, a mere 35. Okay.
Yeah. Right around the time of Pee-wee's Playhouse. That was, I think, like the second or third article that I did for them. Pee-wee's Playhouse.
And you don't have a year then. Pee-wee sounds like 70s to me, but late.
No, it was mid-80s. Mid-80s, actually.
Okay. What year was the first Tim Burton movie?
Tim Burton was early 80s. I think it was like 81 or 82, somewhere around there.
Okay, and that's already after the TV show had sort of peaked.
What? Oh, Pee-wee's Playhouse? No, Pee-wee's Playhouse followed Tim Burton. If you want the chronology, Pee-wee had done an HBO special called The Pee-wee Herman Show, which was styled as a kid show, but it was actually oriented towards adult audiences. That was followed by Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and then came Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Funny, I thought it started with the series, but
no.
now that you mention it, I vaguely remember the HBO thing. I don't think I had HBO at that time.
Yeah.
Cost money. Channel
still does.
I do remember Channel H. We had Channel H at the radio station, and it went from Channel H to becoming Home Box Office.
Home Box Office.
Right. So all that aside, so you were at Cine Fantastique in all these various capacities.
Right.
You're a freelance writer.
I'm a freelance writer. Presently, I am doing a regular series monthly on Tor called the SF Path to Higher Consciousness.
And for those who don't know, that would be Tor, TOR.com,
right.
Having absolutely nothing to do with the browser.
Having absolutely nothing to do with the browser or the wrestler.
Right.
Tor Johnson.
Or the movie Tour.
Yeah, or the movie Tour or Plan 9 from Outer Space. Although I may get around to Plan 9 from Outer Space on in my column at some point soon.
If you do not forget to mention, I believe it's on YouTube, a group of people, well, including Patton Oswalt and the usual suspects, who sat down and did a table reading.
Yes.
They did a table reading of the movie, complete with a person doing the sound effects. And it is even funnier than the movie.
Yeah. It's out there somewhere. I got to track it down. Probably somebody on YouTube has it.
Okay. But anyhow, I always specify, because whenever somebody says I have this on Tor, Well, they don't say Tor at Tor. They say Tor.com. They say Tor
Tor.com.
books,
Right.
which
Yeah,
are,
that's true. I
uh,
tend to abbreviate,
yeah, but for the listening
but
or
it's
viewing
over at
audience,
Tor.com.
yeah. No, they just say, yeah, it's at Tor. I had a story published by Tor.com, which is very different than having a novel published by Tor Books.
I'm sure.
Indeed. And how many years have you been doing these umpteen-minute reviews for Hour of the Wolf?
Hour of the Wolf, we started in 2013. It's 9 years.
Oh, okay.
Pushing the big 1-0. I've been numbering the episodes according to, or numbering the segments according to season, and for some reason this year is number 10, but actually I think it's next year
Okay.
that we hit the big 1-0.
Okay. So at any rate, getting back to our topic for today, sometimes we do a summer roundup or a winter preview or something like that.
Or
But
springtime decompression.
we're focusing on a book which has been made into, I was going to say 2 movies, but I found out in the last hour is actually 3 movies. There was a first movie. I should go back to IMDb and look. But we're discussing Solaris by Stanislav Lem, which has been adapted a few times. Lem is one of the great writers of science fiction, not as well known here because he was a Polish writer and sometimes not always as well regarded, depending on the book, because not all of the translations were as good as others, which some other, Lem is Polish, but some Russian writers like Andrei and Boris Strugatsky, who are probably the premier Russian writers of science fiction, have suffered some very poor translations. And what do you think of the book?
That seems to be a general trend with Russian or Eastern European translations.
Oh, anything. I mean, Borges has had the same problem, and so has Isaac Bashevis Singer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, only Singer and Borges were aware enough and alive. They spoke English. They knew English, and they were both able to read these and say, "This isn't what I wrote," and talk to the publishers about we need to hire somebody new. And Singer actually always used the same woman after I forget her name, Elizabeth something, and focused.
Elizabeth Barrett Browning.
No.
No. Sorry.
Yeah. So getting back on topic, Lem wrote a great deal. A lot of it was satire. Some of it was not. His best known work is this novel Solaris, which is epic in the number of pages and the different topics he's trying to cover, to say that it's about a satellite orbiting a planet that has a sentient ocean that covers all of the planet is like saying Moby Dick is about a whale. It's a deep, complicated, interesting book, even though it is very limited in the number of characters, since it does take place in an isolated satellite that doesn't have regular transmissions to Earth. Neither movie of the 2, I've seen 2 of the 3 films, and recently to refresh myself, neither of them explain why. And I only just discovered the existence of the first film. Don't know if it's available here. I assume it is. Almost everything is. But then, is it available in English?
Mhm.
I don't know what country it came out from. I don't know if it's a Polish film or a Russian film. But
To be fair, a lot about all three, excluding the earlier film, a lot about all three versions of Solaris is not explained, and I think deliberately so.
deliberately so. But it is fair to say that most of Stanislav Lem's writing was satirical in nature, even though
Mhm.
it wasn't necessarily ha ha, although he did
Yeah,
that too, to the
yeah.
point where the second episode ever of Red Dwarf
Mhm.
is more or less scarfed from a short story of Lem's.
Yeah.
Uh,
And let me just say, I'm glad you bring up the point of the satirical aspect of Lem because I wasn't aware of this, but one of the things that struck me about reading the Lem novel was that I got the sense, and this is sort of a part of what I think is addressing the larger theme that he's trying to do with Solaris. One of the things that struck me about it was that it seemed to me that he was taking the urine out of quantum physics.
mhm. He may very well have been doing that.
Yeah,
He had a lot of agendas. Uh,
yeah.
he wrote farce,
Hmm.
where there's a story. This is the one, in fact, that sort of got the plot was reused, where his characters, there's only two characters on board a spaceship that happen to go into some kind of time dilation thing, so that there's more than one person of instance of each person, and they can talk to each other, they can interact. And they do so much so that by the time they get to a certain point, that there are several hundred
Hmm.
of each person in the Lem story. And he tries to prevent himself from doing something. So he hides behind a corner with a club to knock him, an earlier version of himself, unconscious. Of course, a later version might be there trying to protect the earlier version, and so on and so forth. And what ends up happening by the time the story is over is they have formed committees. The committees are all talking, they accomplish absolutely nothing. And if anybody who reads this doesn't realize that this is a farcical takedown of communism
Hmm.
in communist satellite Poland,
Hmm.
because it was in that era, well, fortunately, those in power just didn't get either satire or science fiction, more likely either,
Hmm.
and got away with it. There's not that much satire in Solaris, but
Well, here's what I think of that is that a good portion of the book, and there's a whole other aspect that we haven't really covered yet that needs to be covered because it's really the crux of more the movies than even the book. But a good portion of the book is involved with the protagonist, Kelvin, in a library going over all this material that was done by previous, they called, and I'm going to mispronounce it, either Solarists or Solarists,
mhm.
trying to figure out what's going on with this sentient sea
Well, yeah, I
that
mean,
they are orbiting.
let us give the most basic premise of the book, which is there is a satellite sent out from Earth, um, to this planet, which Earth recognizes is very important because They can't, it's got physics and things they can't figure
Yeah.
out. And all of a sudden, all communications with the satellite have ceased.
Mhm.
And they send a mission out to find out why, and the mission doesn't return. So they send out a psychologist who is coincidentally, or actually not coincidentally, friends with one of the
With-
people who runs the mission to find out what's going on. And that is the most basic premise of the story that is consistent with the three versions that we are going to be discussing. Only one of which is the Bible, and that is, of course, the novel by Lem. Anything else is an interpretation.
Well, I would throw in one other aspect, which I do think is an important aspect, but I think it's more important to the films than it is to the book, is that once there, Kelvin discovers that the planet or the sentient ocean is manifesting people out of each of their pasts
Well, we're actually getting
on,
ahead of ourselves.
on the station, but that's another
I mean, that
consistent theme
that is the
throughout.
most important aspect, but especially if we deal in terms of the plot before, why each person made the movie that they did. The Russian film by Andrei Tarkovsky starts very much on Earth. Tarkovsky is always a fan of showing nature and things like that. And we have our lead character, Kelvin, looking at nature, sitting next to his mother, with whom he almost never communicates. He argues with his father. They've replaced their house, which Kelvin grew up in, with an almost identical one. The point being that memory is everything. Books are memory. Books are manifestations of things that you think about. You read them and you take out of them what you will. And this is something that's mentioned almost in passing. Maybe I'm reading something into it, but I've seen other people refer to it, that this is Kelvin's specialty, is the active memory and what you remember.
To go a little forward, or to elaborate on that, I also think it's important that his father was a Solarist as well as him, and that's I do believe, isn't his father a Solarist as well?
No.
Okay.
No, his father's never been to space. His father isn't a psychologist.
Okay.
No, there is an interpretation, which is a spoiler of one of the movies, and only one of them.
Okay.
About.
I will say this: the difference between both Tarkovsky and Soderbergh and the Lem version is that the Lem version begins with Kelvin already in transit.
Yes.
To Solaris, the whole
I'm still
earthbound aspect.
Let me outline the plot of
the
book.
Go ahead.
Because the book is everything. Anything else is an interpretation. I said that earlier, and I'm sticking to it. And it turns out there's a third movie I wasn't aware of, and I wouldn't be surprised if at some point there will be a fourth, because it is it's a thick, rich story. So suffice it to say that after seeing scenes of natural stuff, particularly in the Tarkovsky film, we go to everything after that is sterile. Because we're going to a spaceship. We're in transit. We get there, and there's nobody to greet him. His friend, who had sent him a message, won't reply, and everybody else, if they see him, there's only like 3 people on this satellite, all slam their doors. They won't talk to him. They're all hiding something. and they won't tell him what it is they are hiding, other than one who will communicate with him says, "You'll find out.
Mhm.
You'll go to sleep, and when you wake up, you will understand." It then all these three versions diverge
Mhm.
where they go. In one, the things that you were talking about are called visitors. In another, they're called guests. And I don't think Lem actually says has a word for them.
I don't think he actually uses. No, I
Yeah,
don't think he actually uses a
yeah,
term for them.
and nobody actually calls them Solarists because we do not know if they are sentient.
Well, no, the scientists who are involved
They're all
with
scientists. Yeah.
with well, yeah, but the scientists who are involved with the study of Solaris are called Solarists.
Okay, I'd forgotten that.
Yes,
That's in the book.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I've read the
That's
book
that.
3 times
That's the
since then.
book, and the Tarkovsky and Soderbergh abandons that, possibly for understandable reasons. But I think it in abandoning it loses an aspect of an important aspect that of both the novel and the Tarkovsky version that I think elevates
Okay, but
them.
we still haven't given people the
Yes.
premise of how any of this movie could be or what it's about.
Yes.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
so
Yeah.
putting first things first.
Yes.
As Kelvin wakes up, he finds his wife next to him. We see largely in flashback, both in the book and in both movies, that yeah, at first it's like, how did she get there? And then it becomes evident something that had not been said. His wife is dead. Everybody has had a visitor. It's not necessarily a spouse. In one case, it's a child. And in all cases, the visitors, the guests, whatever you want to call them, are deceased. There's no duplicates going on here. But are these real people? They don't know what they are. So, what we end up understanding is they are replications of the memory of the scientists on board and that have been created by this sentient ocean. It's sort of a bizarre wish fulfillment, perhaps, because all these characters are not enemies. They're not. It's not like James Kirk and Flynn. These are all loved ones in one manner or another, and in just about every case, they're not just loved ones, but they are people that the host person feels guilty about. In the case of Kelvin, he has said things and done things that caused his wife to commit suicide. And there are similar anomalies with each of the people. So, this is why books and recordings and the like are so important because they are externalized versions of memory. And perhaps these phantasms, guests, visitors, whatever you want to call them, are the same. She, his wife, does not know that she is not his wife. She doesn't, she knows where things are, but she doesn't know certain things about him, like places that he has not been, or rather places where he's been and she has not.
Mhm.
He goes a bit nuts and sends her off the spaceship, presumably to die. But we're not told. But, if he puts her into a little shuttle and fires that shuttle away, he ain't going to be seeing her. But he goes to sleep, he wakes up. And now, all of a sudden, when she wakes up, she realizes she's totally dependent on him. And she knows. She doesn't realize that he has, in essence, killed her. But she does know that she is not as human as he. In other words, it's all about memory. It's all about what Kelvin knows is what she knows. And that's a major point in the Tarkovsky. In the Steven Soderbergh remake that starred George Clooney and
Bear with me. I will tell you in a second. That would be Natasha McElhone.
I was thinking of who's running the ship in the second movie.
Let's see. Well, Viola Davis. Viola Davis.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all. And Viola Davis is the head. We don't know any of the actors in the U.S. that are in the Tarkovsky film. Now, it's we're dealing with three different cultures here between these three different works. Lem was a very proud Pole. Tarkovsky, a perhaps not quite as proud Russian. And Steven Soderbergh, very proud Ocean's 11, very proud
creator of Ocean's 11.
Creator, a recreator.
Recreator of
Ocean's 11 and 12 and 13 and 8. I liked 8, by the way. I also like what is it? Logan's Lucky Logan. What?
Logan Lucky.
Logan Lucky.
Very and just as an aside, as long as we're bringing up random Soderbergh films,
yes.
The Limey for me. But
I say it again.
The Limey.
Yes, and also is it Kimmy? The one with Zoe Kravitz?
That one I'm not sure.
It's about a year old. It's not an old movie.
Okay, yeah, so
it's a great movie. However, I mean, if you want to see a movie starring Zoe Kravitz and your choice is between, I think it's Kimmy, K-I-M-I, or The Batman, watch Kimmy.
Nobody should watch The Batman as far as I'm concerned.
Say again?
I'm sorry, I said nobody should watch The Batman as far as I'm concerned. But
I'm with you on that. Not the biggest Matt Reeves fan. Not even his Neil Gaiman material.
He's done some good stuff and some stuff that I've gone.
Yeah. But the Batman, which they're gonna, given where Warner Bros. Is going, they're gonna do another.
Yeah.
You just know it. The only question is, who are they going to exhume Heath Ledger? No. Okay. Let me ask you the trivia question that a few people have put forth, and for reasons having to do with some sad news as late. Let me ask you this question, which I think is a damned good one. Who was the best?
Oh, I know where this is going. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Is he the Joker or is he the Batman?
Kevin Conroy?
No.
No.
Close. Very close. There is
wait. I'm sorry. Say again.
The answer... Kevin Conroy was Batman, right?
Kevin Conroy was Batman who just passed
the best Joker?
And believe it or not,
who is the best? The question is nothing to do with Kevin Conroy. The question is, who is the best Joker? The answer is not Cesar Romero.
He's the answer for who was the best Joker who managed. to
No,
contractually retain his mustache.
who's
But
the best Joker? Period.
who was? Oh, gee, it's um, it's a trick question because
It's a
the
mild one.
Joker morphs between versions, and so
This is
I
one
wouldn't
series
compare
been
Chris
running.
Nolan's. Hmm?
Mm,
I wouldn't comparing Chris Nolan's Joker
no,
to the animated series Joker is apples and oranges.
I would say not. I would say definitely that the animated one is Mark Hamill, and he
Yes,
does the best job of being the Joker
yes,
that anybody has ever done.
yes. But Heath Ledger did
Adequate.
the best Joker as well, I believe.
If we're going to go live action, it's Jack Nicholson for me. Thank you.
Really, if
Absolutely. Absolutely. No question about it.
you see,
Heath Ledger brought a menace to it. He did not really inhabit the idea of the Joker, as far
but
as I am concerned.
but as far as you see,
If
because
if he had if he
I
had
sort
lived,
of come from
he
it
wouldn't even have
from
been nominated for an Academy.
yeah.
Not even
I so
nominated.
I come up from it from the standpoint of when I got reintroduced to Batman was with the Killing Joke. And the Joker in the Killing Joke is a much more terrifying figure than,
And that's post Heath Ledger.
that's pre Heath Ledger, as a matter of fact.
Hmm.
By about 20 years. Killing Joke was, I forget when, but once again,
Okay.
it was published in
Oh,
the 80s.
okay. Well, all that aside, yes, different editors, different writers, different
Different,
medium. I think they
different medium,
eventually
different origins.
and so forth.
Yeah,
But but
the heat, but
I was
just
talking about on screen.
on screen.
I did say that.
Yeah,
So
I will. Jack Nicholson's Joker was great. I still stand by Heath Ledger as
yeah,
the best
and
part.
Heath Ledger, not even that movie does that much for me. I would
Yeah.
I would like it a lot better if it were cut by 40 minutes. And that's true of most Christopher Nolan films.
Yeah.
But particularly that one, because the moment the Joker is defeated, the movie is over, as far
Mhm.
as I'm concerned. But it goes on with Two-Face for another
Yeah.
40 minutes. And that could have been put into the next film or been a film in and of itself. It just runs way too long. The best film of that trilogy, as far as I'm concerned, is the first, the origin story. And I think it's the best origin story of Batman that I have seen. But as far as the villains are concerned, the Tim Burton, the Ti-
But
the Tim Burton movie brought the era of the superhero movie
mhm.
that we have now.
Yeah.
He created it.
By the way, same problem with the Batman. Once the Riddler is vanquished, that's where it should have stopped.
I agree.
Instead, it goes on, and like I put in my Facebook post, Batman faces his most daunting foe, a clutch of anonymous stooges.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I agree on that.
Yeah.
I agree on that. But anyhow,
Back to Solaris.
best performance, actor performance portrayal, if you will,
Mm.
of the Joker's
No,
Mark Hamill. And
yeah. Mark Hamill got it.
yeah, and I think most
Yeah,
aficionados
yeah,
of that stuff would they won't think of him because they don't think of they don't think of animated characters being actors, although that line got crossed
yeah.
by Andy
I,
Serkis quite a while ago.
I think most people of our ilk would would include Mark Hamill in.
Except most people of our ilk may never watch the animated version.
Oh no,
I don't
no.
watch any of
Well,
the animated Star Wars.
je suis ici, mon frère.
Yeah. but I have seen coming attractions with Mark Hamill doing the role, and also since the fellow who plays the Batman for so many years recently died, Kevin
Died.
Conroy,
Yeah, Kevin
who you
Conroy.
mentioned, who you mentioned. Mark Hamill is one of the very first people to be issuing
Yeah, yeah,
sadness.
yeah. And
And if people don't
weirdly,
know why Mark Hamill is doing it, it's because he's the Joker.
yeah.
I'm sure a few people are going, Luke, what are you doing, Luke? Getting back to our topic.
Yeah, what was it again?
So what happens is Tarkovsky, who is the main director, is in a way the Soderbergh film is almost a footnote.
Yeah.
And I'll actually explain that and put that aside thusly.
Mhm.
It, and I said this to you off air. I think describing the two movies have nothing to do with each other in terms of plot. You can take Moby Dick and you can see that as a manual on how to rend a
Right.
whale. He does it for 90 pages,
Yeah.
which is a short novel in and of itself. There are
Yeah.
just so many aspects to Solaris that I think you can pick the story you want to tell as long as you keep the framework intact.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Which is what we get in both films. Just so people know, the Tarkovsky film in the cut that I saw, which I believe is the Criterion cut, runs 2 hours and 45 minutes. The Soderbergh version runs just a scooch over 90.
that is correct.
Half
And the Tarkovsky, the one you saw, that is the complete. It has been
Yeah.
shown in shorter versions.
Yeah.
And
I had originally seen it in '73 over at the Ziegfeld, the late lamented Ziegfeld.
Or the Ziegfeld.
Ziegfeld. Yes,
Everybody says
Ziegfeld.
Ziegfeld. I just saw a movie, a major movie in which somebody,
Said Ziegfeld.
says Mr. Ziegfeld.
So
And
I don't feel so alone now.
and I think that they were being totally mischievous when they did it.
I wasn't.
They're
Okay.
being no such
Ziegfeld.
word as mischievous, but
Ziegfeld.
mischievous.
But in any case, and I had an argument with someone else. I don't think it was you, about whether that was the full-length version or not. I do think I saw the full-length version.
The Russian version is 2:45.
Yeah, yeah,
Or thereabouts.
yeah.
It runs just shy of 3 hours. And if you see the proper one, I saw it at Film Forum when I think that was the first time the full length version recut had been shown, somewhere in the late 70s. I'm thinking, okay, the novel is what, about 63?
Yeah, I think so.
And the Tarkovsky film is 72, and the timing of that is very important. And the Soderbergh film is in the early noughts of the third millennium. And I sat in the film forum, having made sure that I had gotten my bathroom break. There is no intermission, and whatever food I needed, so that I could sit down and watch it. And the movie begins, and at some unknown point in time, the movie is over. The same is true of Tarkovsky's brilliant film Stalker.
I will say this about
when you're watching the film properly in a cinema, the way it's actually meant to be seen, time passes differently.
This was the thing I was thinking about as I was watching the Tarkovsky, is that it's not unusual nowadays for these mainstream tentpole films, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the DC Extended Universe to be running like 2 hours, 15 minutes, 2 hours, 30 minutes, and it will be packed with action and explosion and incident, and you'll be sitting there going, when is this going to end? And Solaris, and similarly, Stalker is not jam-packed full of stuff, but you don't feel the time.
You just don't feel the time. This is true of Tarkovsky in general. He's made like 3 fantastic films with fantastic stuff. The third one, which may actually be his best, depends on who you talk to, is called The Sacrifice.
Yeah, and I still need to see that.
It's quite a movie. It's quite a movie. And
right after Terrifier 2, but that's another story.
And he waxes poetic.
Mm-hmm.
His is a cinema of poetry, of earthliness, of humanity, and
you can call it immersive. You can call it similar to 2001 experiential.
Well, the reason we're going there.
Yeah, we'll get there.
I think we are there.
Okay.
And the point is that Tarkovsky, no doubt, I mean, maybe he would have made a different thing. We should mention that the movie Stalker is not a stalker movie. It is based on Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, who are probably the best known Russian science fiction writers, and brilliant writers they are. That's a great book if you read the correct translation.
Yeah. And I had read it recently because I did do an article for Tor.com on Stalker, and as part of that, I did. It's one of my favorite novels, and I've determined I've got to read more Eastern European science fiction.
Well, in that case, you should be aware of. I'm not doing this interview till next week.
What?
La Vie
the best of world science. He's showing me a book called The Best of World Science Fiction,
and he's showing you that it's a very, very, very thick book. And what's more, this is volume 2.
So it's again Dangerous Visions thick. I don't know that it's quite the last Dangerous Visions thick, but nothing could be as thick as the last.
Yes, exactly. And or as empty.
Yeah, maybe we're still waiting, aren't we?
Well, somebody claims to be putting it out, but
that's what I heard. It's been a year.
It's been an Ellison age, let's put it that way.
Indeed.
And also the people that sold their stories to the last Dangerous Visions are not getting their stories picked up. This is a new anthology. It's not Ellison. These are not the stories that Ellison chose. Therefore, as far as I'm concerned, it's not Dangerous Visions. It may be using the premise, but it's not what Ellison, well, if you'll pardon the use of the word, envisioned. So
I see what you did there.
But rights reverted, and most people resold those stories. So the stories that would have been
are not.
So are not.
So in any case, but
getting
noted about World SF.
Yes. So yes, because there's also African science fiction. There is Indian science fiction. There's a fair amount of Turkish science fiction and so forth. And when we say science fiction, of course, we have to point out that we're not discussing scientific fiction. We're talking about the genre that includes fantasy and horror.
Hmm.
less so horror, because you
Yeah.
can have a lot of horror that isn't necessarily fantasy or science fiction. Standard stalker
Yeah.
movies don't necessarily have a supernatural element. But
But what I picked up though from Roadside Picnic and from Solaris was a certain attitude that appealed to me that I don't think I encountered in American science fiction. European science fiction is sort of maybe Eastern European fractiousness,
mhm. I
shall we say.
I would say that there's definitely fractiousness in Tar a number of Tarkovsky films.
Films,
They
but
they
all
they run under the radar,
yeah.
being very critical
Hmm.
of Soviet, um, things, and he grew up under Soviet rule in Poland.
Yeah.
So it's not about Russia per se, but about the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
which basically held
Hmm.
lock rule over Eastern Europe,
Yeah.
and there are those in power today
Mhm.
in Russia that would like to reclaim that,
Yeah.
which was given away.
Back to Solaris though, just so I note, one of the scientists in the Lem novel and also in the Tarkovsky film Snout is more confrontational in the novel than I feel he is in the film.
Well, there are differences,
Yeah.
and many differences between the novel and the film. But the point is, again, we're talking about a very lengthy novel. I can't tell you a
Mhm.
word count or a page count. It's over 700 pages. It's a
Mhm.
big book,
Yeah.
folks. It's a long book,
Mhm.
in which not necessarily a great deal happens in terms of action or
Mhm.
changes in people's lives, but in their memory, in how they interpret things. And that's what's important. Now, why did Tarkovsky decide to make this movie? Because the last thing I was saying before was that he might have gone in a very different direction. What am I hearing? Oh, I'm hearing geese on my TV. Um, I have the Mississippi River Flyway on. It's migration system season. Just go to YouTube. You can find anything live, live. So anyway, the going back a little, Dan and I stake a claim, and others do too, and it's a bold claim, but one that we separately or together will fight to the end. Is that the best?
Together, arm locked in arm.
Uh, uh, is that the best science fiction movie ever made? Is 2001: A Space Odyssey,
Still stand by
which Tarkovsky thought was the worst ever made.
it.
Well, this is the whole reason why he made Solaris. It's not that he read the Lem novel and was that moved, although he was and did. It's that he took a look at the Kubrick film and said, no, 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 this is cold. This is very cold. It's noteworthy that Lem also hated 2001: A Space Odyssey, and for the same reason. Now, to call a Kubrick film cold is to merely describe a Kubrick film.
Yes, true.
Yeah, with the exception of Lolita, from a different Russian writer.
Yeah, George.
Uh, but if you just think of Kubrick's, oh,
Mhm.
that's what he did. That's who he was. That was even Barry Lyndon, or maybe especially Barry Lyndon,
Mhm.
because that's basically who Barry Lyndon is. That's who, and that agrees with the novel in every way, shape, and form of Barry Lyndon. But Tarkovsky's feeling was that good science fiction didn't need to be cold in order to be good. It didn't need to be about the science or anything. And the people in 2001 we don't know anything about the character. When the characters are being killed off, we don't even know their names unless we read upside down and see them in their little cryogenic things. And the one other character played by Gary, which he was on the first broadcast episode of Star Trek.
Yeah.
Outside of the name Dave Bowman, we don't need any character names. It's not about that.
Yeah.
But Tarkovsky.
By the way, there was an anecdote in the making of Kubrick's 2001.
I'm going to finish this point.
Okay, finish your point. Sorry.
Because we're talking about Tarkovsky here, not Kubrick.
Okay.
We're talking that Kubrick's film propelled Tarkovsky to say, you can make a science fiction film as long, as immersive, in which as little happens as happens in 2001. In fact, less. And this will not only not be cold, it will be hot. The emotions will be hot. They will be Russian. Which, they don't serve their borscht cold too much in Russia.
They don't serve their emotional borscht cold.
Yes. And this was much of what propelled the way Tarkovsky made it. Some people take it a step further and say Tarkovsky made Solaris to prove the point that you could be hot, emotional, have nothing to do with science. It is science fiction. It's not fantasy, but it is a science that is so far out of our understanding. And also, one thing it shares with 2001 is we do not understand the motives of the monolith, but we know that it is either A, sentient, or B, being operated by a sentience. And the same is true of the ocean in Solaris. Outside of that, the two movies purport to be absolute opposites.
Absolute opposites, including, I think, the idea that with 2001, the implication is that we are going to grow as we grow technologically, as we advance our technology, we will essentially advance as a species.
And the end of Solaris, and we're going to have to give a spoiler warning now.
Well, let me just say this, that Solaris goes the opposite direction, and I think...
Oh, that's why we have to give a spoiler warning.
Oh, well, no, we don't need to do it yet. You can continue my point. My point is that Solaris, with both Lem and Tarkovsky and Soderbergh, but I think Soderbergh lies on this point. It's an interesting point that Solaris begins at the end of the study, as the study of this planet is essentially falling apart. The typical science fiction story, as you know, is the explorers arrive at the planet, weird stuff happens, and they discover why. And Shore Leave is a prime example. The Star Trek episode Shore Leave is a prime example. Solaris is about the loss of purpose, and we bring these scientists, the advanced technology, trying to solve the riddle of the sentient ocean, and
which is not solvable.
And because of that, and here's the
and
the
it's
other
never
interesting thing is, and
explained to
here's where
us,
the
the
power of
audience, or
film.
to the characters. That's
What?
very
Sorry.
important. The reason for that is never explained either to the characters nor
Yeah,
to us, the audience.
yeah, yeah. The power of film over the novel in this particular case is in both cases, both Lem and Tarkovsky are able underline the point that the station is in a state of decay. The thing about it is that with Lem's novel, he has to keep reminding you of it. With Tarkovsky's film, it's in every frame.
Yes, you do see it. Less so in the Soderbergh.
Yeah, yeah.
In the Soderbergh,
And that's one of the problems with the
uh,
Soderbergh. That's why the Soderbergh is the lesser
well,
version.
yeah, well, he has a different take on it
Yeah,
altogether. He's using the same framework. He's telling a different story.
yes, yes. And I think, frankly, a lesser story.
It's not as good a film, and I think that Soderbergh would agree with that. I mean,
Yeah.
one is a masterwork.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. The Soderbergh film, not to knock him too much, it's a good film, but I was left with it thinking, well, what is the point of that? In the Soderbergh film, the point of it is that there's a guy whose wife has committed suicide and he finds her again on the station. With both Lem and Tarkovsky, there's much, much more to that. That is not the point in and of itself.
As I said, and a few people have said, uh, they interpret the wife and the visitors in general as being about what it is that we remember and what it is that we hold close
Mhm.
and what really matters to us, because who or what is choosing what the visitor is.
Mhm.
In the case of one person who experiences, and this is actually brought forth more in the Soderbergh film than the Tarkovsky, it's a child. And uh, if that person is somehow done away with, they simply reappear. They
Mhm.
never can go away. And now this is the point where we claim a spoiler alert that the very end of the Tarkovsky film, it's complicated.
Heck yeah.
Uh, he we had, as I said, we've spent somewhere between 20 minutes to half an hour at the beginning of the movie with him and his father, and
Mhm.
also talking to a couple of colleagues and
Mhm.
having some flashback memories of how he met his wife
Mhm.
and stuff like that. And arguing over rebuilding the house or building a new house.
Mhm.
Very important, because the end of the Tarkovsky film is that all of a sudden he's home again, and there's his father, and he falls to his knees, and he clutches his father's legs, and he cries. This psychologist who's been through so much cries, and he accepts his father as having been right to hold on to such a memory as the house, and that this is permanent. And the camera begins to pull out and out and out. And what we see is the plot of land on which the house sits. And the house itself and his father are yet another satellite over the ocean. He has never left Solaris. It is another construct of the sentient ocean. And the ocean is keeping alive for him now, if not his wife, his childhood, his parents, the books he's read, the things he has seen, the things he has done. And that, I think, is very much not the point of the movie, but a point, and a very important point of what is it that we hold dear, and should we, because this is not necessarily a positive thing, the people who've been exposed to these wonderful things that the ocean is granting them, not necessarily good for the people who experience them. Is this a good thing or not? That's up to you. Whereas the Kubrick film, and this,
Soderbergh.
Hmm?
Soderbergh.
Whereas the
Oh,
Kubrick
Kubrick film. Okay, you're talking 2001. Sorry.
Yes, we're discussing 3
2001.
movies here.
Okay.
Being that one is made in response to the other.
Mm-hmm.
There's more in common or more to distinguish 2001 and Tarkovsky's film than there is Tarkovsky's and Soderbergh's film. And now I forgot my point. Oh, yes, the Kubrick film, at the end of it, is a very Clarkian. Now, I don't credit Clark as being the major author of 2001. That's Clark came in somewhere during the 3rd draft after Kubrick had already written 2. And the point of the end of the Kubrick film is, in fact, the beginning also, as we have the dawn of man. An ape now has a tool, albeit a weapon, is the next step in evolution, where we go to the star child. He's taking a step forward. The Tarkovsky is keeping everything static.
To connect with that, the other thing I took away from both the Lem and the Tarkovsky versions is that I think both of them are focusing on a loss of purpose. I think it's underlined more in the Lem version with Kelvin's study of all of these investigations that all the previous Solarists have done of the planet. And you do get a sense of a kind of eventually spinning of wheels.
Well, he is a psychologist. That is his domain.
But I think, and here again, this gets into my impression that what he's doing is also looking at things like the study of quantum physics and how the people who become immersed in this can get to it to such a depth that essentially it becomes meaningless to anything else except its own study.
And, well, I think there are people that come close to understanding some of the ideas behind quantum physics. Who would
I never have.
Tom Stoppard goes there as well in one of his plays where, and I don't remember the title, it's one of the few plays of his I have never seen, but I have read. And they do demonstration in the play of itself. There's a famous demonstration where you take one source of light and you beam it 2 different things away from each other, and the same beam of light is there, and it exists in both places at once.
Weirdly, there is
quantum physics is so bizarre.
Yeah, there is a thing, and here is the thing about the novel is that is not really explored in either film, is that the novel goes into depth about manifestations on the surface of the sentient ocean. And the thing that you mentioned here was something that struck me, is that there is one structure that they describe in depth that shows up simultaneously, identically, in 2 separate places. and that's actually what raised to mind for me the concept of quantum physics. I know bleep all about quantum physics, but
I've actually read a bit.
I've tried.
I don't understand huge amounts.
Me neither. But there was a parallel from what I understood about quantum physics, about the idea that an identical particle could appear in two separate places at the same time. So it's the same idea essentially as what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, that is a manifestation of quanta.
Yeah.
But once we see Ant-Man, Quantumania, it will all be explained to us.
The veil shall be torn away.
Yes, exactly. As will the screens. But although I have to admit to enjoying the Ant-Man movies, but
I like the Ant-Man movies.
Yeah,
people say they're minor films, but I'm like, not every MCU film has to be about the potential end of the universe.
And that's the way I feel about some of the TV series, especially my favorite is the latest She-Hulk.
Yeah. Same.
That and WandaVision both blew me away.
Yeah. Same
innovative, brilliant television, and totally worked within the framework of the MCU. Pardon.
That's okay.
That I think that's more key to Lem's writing than it is to Tarkovsky's thinking, other than the fact that Tarkovsky is always a very deep thinker, including dealing with religion and what is it? The life of now I'm forgetting the character's name, but about a person who makes icons, IKONS, religious figurines. One of his shorter films, only 2.5 hours. And, well, he makes long movies.
Yes,
he's Russian,
and worthwhile movies.
Yeah, they are. So it's an interesting thing, and I think, and I don't think that anybody could make a version of Solaris that Lem would appreciate. There was also a radio version, a BBC radio version. I don't know how he thought of that, and he was alive to hear it. But he was not simple to satisfy because his thinking, his ideas are so deep. I don't think that can be brought to the screen. And I think that his shortcoming was that he is so far beyond the rest of us in certain realms of thinking, in understanding his own art. I cannot take a look at a lot of modern art that people will hail as being amazing. Now I'm blanking on the name of the artist, the one who splashed the paint on his.
Oh boy,
Ed Harris.
And you did it to me. What was it?
Ed Harris.
Ed Harris. Yes, that's right. Yes.
And
I remember that.
And I've actually seen every one of his paintings because I once vacationed over at Washington University, where all his paintings were on display at that time. But the point is, I can't look at that and say what they are.
Jackson Pollock.
Thank you, Jackson Pollock.
Thank you, Google.
I don't think I can even look at 3 different Pollocks and tell them apart. Mondrian, maybe. And then what does it mean? And we have just discovered that there's a Mondrian modern art painting that's been hanging for 50 years upside down,
Upside down.
and
Yeah.
nobody noticed until now. How do you interpret that? Now Mondrian may very well have been able to. Um, and I think, and I've spoken to certain artists of that oeuvre who say, gee, I don't remember. It had to do with how I felt at that time.
Mhm.
And I don't feel that way now. So
To,
I
to, bring,
can't put
to
it in
bring it
words.
back, Kubrick always held the attitude that once it's out of my hands, the interpretation belongs to the audience.
Which is one of the reasons why he was very upset about the novelization of 2001. Yeah, well, Clark gives a reason. Clark gives an ending. Clark tells stories that Kubrick never envisioned. I always, but that's a whole other argument and a whole other radio show.
As far as Lem is concerned, I can understand why he did not like the Tarkovsky version, but it's ironic because they are essentially, I think, getting to the same point, but from two different directions.
And they're both dealing with the same thought exercises.
Yes. Yeah.
I would say that, but I think that for Lem, the journey was equally important to the destination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
And I don't think that's as true of either of the film versions.
may not be. Yeah, may not be.
I mean, and there's some very interesting stuff in the Tarkovsky film. We generally don't see the planet. We see the planet from above. Remember, we're on a satellite.
We see the planet from above. We see it
Maybe
sort of in
we see the planet from above, to finish the sentence, about 5 times.
Yeah.
And if you compare, there is a point at which things on the satellite start changing.
Mm-hmm.
And we take a look at the planet, which was green.
Mm-hmm.
It's now red. Watch that movie carefully. There's a lot of sly stuff that Tarkovsky is throwing in that he does not bother to explain, and I don't think that Lem understood it either. I think that Tarkovsky got something out of the novel which could not easily be explained, and so he returned the favor in kind. So the inexplicable is a part, even though Tarkovsky gives, well, sort of another puzzle at the end, which, and that I think is what diminishes the Soderbergh a bit, is that he gives you more of a denouement.
Yeah, and to me, and if you want to talk about it as being an aspect or an exploration of memory or an exploration of loss of purpose, I think Soderbergh deliberately, and here we go.
I think the Soderbergh is loss of purpose. I think the Tarkovsky are loss of people, of your loved memories.
Maybe, but I do feel that Tarkovsky is exploring loss of purpose, though. I think Soderbergh, quite frankly, is more about loss of people, and it doesn't get further than that.
And the sheer fact is that we're both right. That each filmmaker is sophisticated enough, because when you hear about remakes like that, and are forthcoming, and then you see it, and or in my case, usually I dread it. It's like, what was the point of remaking that? And then you see, oh, well, he has a very the filmmaker has a very different take from the other filmmaker, and furthermore, took something different out of the novel. And with a novel that covers so many different realms, grounds, areas, things like that, I think that's fair.
Mhm.
There can be more than one valid interpretation. However, I also believe that you can't just say to Lem, well, who are you to criticize? Because these, without his thinking, not just his work,
Mhm.
but without his thinking, neither movie would exist.
Well, yeah,
The thoughts, the premise of either would not, could not
mm,
exist.
mm, that's true.
So,
Although we can talk about the Alan Moore template where he just
well,
goes.
that's a whole other ball of wax. But I think the thing that we have to leave listeners with, since we get to keep about 40 minutes of this, and we've now been recording for an hour 17,
Yeah.
uh, we should be wrapping.
Yes.
And I think part of the point here is that people should read the novel and do
Mhm.
that first before seeing any other interpretation
Mhm.
of that book. Um, One I do not, Moby Dick may be another thing because that book goes into so many different weird places.
I tried with Moby Dick.
There are books within the
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
more than two. It's not even like James Joyce, where it's about a journey and you establish so many things. At the end, you're still in Molly's bed.
Mhm.
But with Solaris, one of the greatest works of science fiction,
Yeah.
uh, it,
Literary or film.
yeah, I simply said one of the greatest works. People will take out of it what they will. And I think that would be just fine with Lem, who had a great long career and loved to argue with um, people who studied him and appreciated him. And he had a great time. But I can understand why he was unhappy with either of the two film adaptations. But if one takes a look on Wikipedia or something, you find out there have been a dozen adaptations in different forms: radio, film, painting. Three films that I'm aware of. I think actually the first, I think, was made for TV, not American TV, certainly. I don't think we'll ever see that. I, but
But but just to elaborate, the two films
yeah,
are also worthy, but the Tarkovsky is the worthier one.
the Tarkovsky is a masterpiece.
Yeah.
I would say it's up there with Kubrick, which is saying a lot.
Mhm.
Having said that, it may not be Tarkovsky's best film or greatest work. Um, and which that is, I think, would start an incendiary battle,
Mhm.
which may very well be worth having some other time. But he didn't make that many films. He was like
Mhm.
Kubrick in that respect as well. He took his time in between them. But I would say, by all means, read the book. By all means, see the movie. Take your time reading the book. Set aside a month.
Yes.
I'm absolutely serious. Set aside a month. It's not a book it's not a page turner. You don't just flip through it. There's a lot of deep philosophical thought happening there. And when
And
yeah,
go ahead. And just tangentially, I would also recommend Roadside Picnic, which is
yeah,
one of my favorite
I
novels.
wanted to compare the book and movie here.
Yeah.
When you see the movie, darken your room, have have had a meal, figure out the point at which you're going to take your much needed break. you will need one. I'm not quite sure. I think it's at the point where the planet changes color. Let's call that Act 2.
Well, there is an actual act break in the film.
Okay, I didn't recall that.
Yeah, there is.
There,
So that's the point. You go and you do your ablutions.
yes, exactly. But the point is, you don't watch half tonight and half tomorrow night. It's a movie where you don't feel time passing, and you should not. You should just let it tell its story, be done. It runs just shy of 3 hours. Put aside the better part of an evening. The first film I can't comment on, and the Soderbergh film is a very interesting exercise.
Mhm.
But I wouldn't bother seeing it if you haven't seen the Tarkovsky.
Yeah, I would agree with it.
And I would say that you can watch the Tarkovsky and not have read the book, but your experience won't be as good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you were saying about Roadside Picnic.
Yes. I just wanted to throw that in there as long
Yeah,
as
that Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, undoubtedly the best Soviet, if not Russian and Soviet writers of science fiction, of which there's been a good deal.
and
The movie Stalker that was made from Roadside Picnic is brilliant.
it is brilliant, and I will say this is that in comparison to what was done with Solaris, the movie Stalker is not so much an adaptation of Roadside Picnic as it is an elaboration
Yeah,
on Roadside Picnic.
yeah, but I would say in its way that's true of all three of them.
Solaris.
And then you do have to put aside the time to see the sacrifice.
Yes.
The sacrifice at that point, Tarkovsky had already left Russia, and he went to Sweden. And it is not a small coincidence that he uses Ingmar Bergman, cinematographer, man who made Wild Strawberries, the same lead actor as in Wild Strawberries. This is his Bergman film. And only it's even weirder than Bergman gets, and that's saying something.
Yeah.
But that's actually the easiest of his three fantastic films to understand.
And that's going to be on my list.
Okay. And
right after Terrifier 2.
There you go. So, if people want to catch up on your stuff, you've got your column at Tor.com.
Tor.com. We've got the podcast. Oh, sorry.
The weekly reviews on the Hour of the Wolf.
That's correct. We've got the podcast going, but not for long because life intervenes, and that may have to be sacrificed.
Yeah. I understand the problems people have with podcasts. Fortunately, the ones that I work on professionally, from John Joseph Adams, are well, we've gotten 2 Hugo Awards so far. We're doing okay.
Yeah, so that's impetus enough.
I would say so. We don't get them anymore because we won for semi-prozine, and and we're now prozines.
Yeah.
So can't win for a semi anymore.
You're in the big leagues now.
Sharing the wealth, as it were, and there ain't much wealth to be made.
Well,
even award-winning podcasts, unless you're getting it adapted by Netflix.
Yeah.
So again, thank you, Dan Persons.
My pleasure.
And stay online. We'll talk after.
Okay.
And as far as the radio audience, and is concerned, I'll be back in the YouTube audience. Watch another one of my videos, why don't you?
Please.
Okay. So take care and talk to you soon.